want to sketch for you a little bit the history of Jewish immigration to Latin America and the ethnicities that were created as a result. As you can see, Latin America is a huge region. It has over 20 countries. There are lots of different languages, not just Spanish and Portuguese. There are parts of Latin America where people speak English. There are many, many different indigenous languages. There are all sorts of things. And each of the countries have very different forms of cultural and economic and social development. So rather than telling you a little bit about every single place, which would take us 5 or 6 hours, I'm going to concentrate on Argentina and Brazil, because those are the two countries that have the largest Jewish populations. But we can talk about things later. The first Jewish immigrants to the Americas came from Spain and Portugal in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. A few of those people came as Jews, and others were defined as new Christians, those who had been forced by the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions to convert to Catholicism. This conversionary process, which publicly demanded a rejection of Judaism, didn't always improve the status of those who accepted Catholicism as their own. Spain and Portugal during the Inquisition were in the throes of religious fervor, having recently expelled the Moors, the Muslims, from Iberia. And a concept of blood purity was very strong. It's not unlike the concept used by the Nazis, right? This idea that somebody is not what they believe and what they practice, but they're somehow innately something. And so in Latin America, like in Iberia, many new Christians, even if they were in fact practicing, believing Christians, were often targeted as Jews. Again, this is a story we know from the 20th century as well. It's really hard for us to know precisely how many Jews lived in Latin America in the 15th, 16th, and 17th century. Jewish religious practice, when it occurred, was secret. And most of the time, people who were called Jews, we don't know very much about whether they were or weren't Jews. It's very hard for us to know. One of the great ironies of this period is that the place where historians go to look for information about Jews is in the records of the Inquisition. And it's very strange, because if you think about it, what do we know about the Inquisition? We know they lied. We know they tortured people. They got confessions. So why would we assume that that's the place where, if they say that's a Jew, or that's a Muslim, or that's a pagan, why would we believe them, right? It's a real problem with this data. And that's why I say it's very hard for us to pinpoint precisely who is who in this period, because from a scholarly perspective, our data sources are really, really terrible. One of the interesting results of this lack of clarity is that the idea that Jews formed colonizers of Latin America became wrong. I'm sure you've heard this, right? Columbus was a Jew, Cortez was a Jew, things like that. It's really hard for us to say that with any precision, because we just simply don't know that. Some colonizers even believed we're the lost tribe of Israel, right? So this was a very strong Catholic belief in that period. One French crackpot theorist from the late 19th century even claimed that King Solomon had sailed the Amazon River, and that all of the languages spoken in the Amazon region of Latin America were offshoots of some kind of ancient Hebrew. Now, I'm calling him a crackpot theorist, but this was an important French scholar of the period. He was being read in places, in top universities at the time. Now, I told you at the beginning that one of the things that's interesting about studying Jews in Latin America is you can't study Jews in Latin America without studying other ethnic groups. So when I first heard this story about King Solomon and this idea that the Amazonian indigenous people were really secret Jews, I started looking around, and what I discovered was that other ethnic groups have exactly the same idea. So for example, if you speak to Mexicans of Chinese descent, they'll tell you a story about a great war between Japan and China, in which Japan was powerful and China was weak and about to be defeated. Fine wind came and saved the Chinese by pushing them across the oceans, where they became the Aztecs. Okay, it makes as much sense as King Solomon driving up the Amazon River, right? Even better was I was in Peru and I was talking to some Peruvians of Japanese descent. Here's the story they told me. There was a great war between China and Japan. China was very, very strong. Japan was weak. A divine wind came and pushed the Japanese to safety, where they became the Incas. So you see here, right, how hard it is to understand in the deeper past who's who, what's what. It's okay, the stories are great. They're wonderful, aren't they? They're worth talking about. From a scholarly perspective, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about whether secret identities are real or not real. It's just not my thing. What we can say with some precision is that in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, for much of those periods, there were very few Jews in Latin America who were doing Jewish things that we would recognize today as Jewish. Cemeteries, synagogues, Hebra Kadisha, I don't know, you can think of those kinds of things.